Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, lessons from the study of Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory, a podcast addressing today's trends and headlines through interviews and conversations with Jewish leaders, inspired by the works of Rabbi Harold Schulweis that make Jewish wisdom more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to today's complicated world. Our guests share their Jewish journeys and discuss how Rabbi Schulweis's wisdom provides inspiration and guidance to us today. Hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach, Senior Rabbi at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California, and board member of the Harold Schulweis Institute, an affiliate of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California.
Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, where we look at the life and legacy and theology of Rabbi Harold Schulweis, who was my teacher when I was growing up. I'm Ari Averbach. I'm also a rabbi, thanks to Rabbi Schulweis. We talked to somebody else who he greatly influenced today, Rabbi Noah Farkas, who is the head of the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles. Rabbi Farkas talks about his personal path to the rabbinate and how Rabbi Schulweis really influenced him in so many different ways. Rabbi Farkas is now on the front lines of fighting anti-Semitism in this crazy time, and some of the lessons that Schulweis taught him along the way that got him ready for this. So thank you for joining us. I am so happy to be here today with you. It's nice to see your face, Rabbi Noah Farkas. As somebody called you recently, the Fed head, which I hadn't heard that phrase before. But that's wonderful. It's nice when it rhymes because it feels more true. So I want to start, we're going to get into all the things Rabbi Schulweis, of course, but I just want to start by saying my first memory of you, thinking of rabbinical school, whatever year it was, and I went to shul. I was at VBS just to go to services, and I saw you make eye contact with me. I was like in the back row, and I saw you make eye contact. I go, oh no, the rabbi's going to talk to me about getting involved. I don't know what's going to happen. And I tried to escape. I never told you. And like, of course, you got to me before I could go get a brownie. And we talked. And what started then was incredible friendship and mentorship with you and your family. And you kind of, I was not only an intern, I learned how to be a rabbi under your tutelage. Just got to see what it looks like to sit in an office and go to staff meetings and raise a family and balance the world of being a rabbi with being a human being.
You remember when you first came over and we hadn't even fully moved into our house yet, and we had all the like I think our table was under a tarp in the backyard. But we had game days, and your daughter would like school me and Ticket to Ride. It was pretty good. And then from there, your career, I mean, I guess both of ours in different ways. I now have a career instead of being a student, and your career has taken a few turns, which is just incredible. And you're at this amazing job looking over Jewry in Los Angeles at the Federation with an incredible team. But I want to see if we can go back a little bit. Do you remember first learning about or meeting Rabbi Harold Schulweis?
Ari, it's really great to see you and to see how successful you've been, and as a real leader of the Jewish community, and really proud of the work that you've done. I think my most proud day for you, if I can, without sounding too paternalistic here, was probably at your ordination. I was just because I think you spoke.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I was a graduation speaker,
and they gave me all sorts of terrible seats to sit in the tent, so I literally muscled my way to the back of the front of the aisle so I could just stand and watch you. And it was one of my more proud days as a rabbi, was to know that a student of mine that I had mentored and had developed a deep friendship with was about to embark on, your career, which has been great. And so it's really good to see you in this context.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I already asked the question, but I'm going to then take a sidestep. Is right after ordination, you took me aside and you said something along the lines of, now you're ready to start learning. And at first I was like, well, I just finished 5 years of school. I've written term papers. I've taken final exams. I've really done my work. And to now know, whatever it is, 10 years into my career, that was very true. I then started learning real texts that I wanted to learn and teach. I started learning from congregants, and I've learned what it means to be a rabbi, because sitting in a classroom learning the theory of being a rabbi is very different than leading a community or being part of a community.
Yeah,
so I think about those words a lot.
We're very good at creating highly trained and incredibly inexperienced leaders. It's part of the model, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So you were at Valley Beth Shalom for a long time, and a lot of that overlapped with Rabbi Schulweis.
Yeah.
Do you remember either meeting him or what that was like?
Yes, absolutely. So, like many of us, I knew of Rabbi Schulweis long before I met him. I was a student of philosophy, of Jewish theology, and when I was at the Jewish Theological Seminary, when I was in seminary, we would study Rabbi Schulweis. We would study his teacher, Mordechai Kaplan. We would study Mordechai Kaplan's teacher, Martin Buber. So it was just sort of a part of what I was most enamored by was the long chain of tradition that goes all the way back to the dawn of modernity of how Jews coming out of the ghetto are confronted by a reality that we weren't prepared for and needed to figure out, which is essentially one simple question that Rabbi Schulweis pondered a lot, which was, given all the freedom that is given to you, or hopefully ever increasing levels of liberty and freedom and empowerment, what Judaism do you choose to do as opposed to what you're forced to do? And what are the threads of tradition that are brought forward that are useful for living the best life possible? And that's essentially the question of modern Jewish theology from the time we were liberated from the ghetto until now. And it's different answers for different ages. So I studied him really in a very much an academic way. And then my last year of rabbinical school, Rabbi Feinstein came and interviewed me and then invited me for a weekend to come to Valley Beth Shalom. And I remember coming, and I mean, they really put you through the paces. If you think the people at the NFL Combine have a lot to go through, just get interviewed at Valley Beth Shalom as a rabbinical student to become a rabbi there was a lot.
Sure. There's the talent competition and the bathing suit competition, and
there's how fast you can roll the Torah, and how high you can jump. And so when I first met Rabbi Schulweis, I was sitting in what was his newer office at the time, because he was no longer the senior rabbi. So he was in that secondary office sitting on those remarkably iconic mid-century blue plaid couches, and him interviewing me. And we had 90 minutes or an hour together. And we spent most of the time discussing Jewish theology, not about what it means to be a rabbi, not what it means to run a congregation, but it was like straight up academic theology, really pushing me on questions around values and how they play against each other, and then how they inure in our ethics. And I think he was just testing me to see if I had the depth of knowledge and of acumen to be able to essentially keep up with him and Rabbi Feinstein. And then at the end of the conversation, he stood up. Rabbi Feinstein came in, and Harold said, "He's good in my book," in that very like Bronx accent way, if you remember. And I shook his hand, and I think it was very important for Rabbi Feinstein to decide whether or not to hire me was that moment. But it was a very good conversation. And then for the number of years afterwards, after I started, in effect for the first 3 or 4 years as the most junior member on staff, in many ways I was Rabbi Schulweis's page, and I would sit with him at high holiday services. I would make sure he got what he needed. I would say I was very fortunate to be able to have such good intimate time with him.
I imagine that's an incredible moment for you. If anybody you've studied, any author you've read, and then to get to sit with them and argue and discuss with them and prove your worth with them. And at Valley Beth Shalom, how important that seems. Because I remember one time you gave a sermon on the Bima. Rabbi Schulweis would give a sermon and then almost open it up for Q&A. Like, he was willing for people to challenge him, which is something that Ed Feinstein continued. I try to do that here, because I think it's important. I shouldn't be the only one with a microphone. I remember one time you gave a sermon, and it was, of course, beautiful. And then people started challenging you, and you held your own. And I remember thinking, okay, he's the newest rabbi. He's brand new here. When Rabbi Schulweis or Rabbi Feinstein, who are sitting on the bima, going to come in and kind of like relieve you and say, if you want to discuss theology, you can come to our office hours. And Musaf was late that day because you held your own and you had a real conversation. I don't know who it was that was like really fighting with you on whatever piece of theology you were teaching. But maybe Schulweis knew this is the community that he created, and people were willing to argue with the rabbi from their pews up to the gigantic bima up there.
Rabbis willing to argue with the congregation. I mean, that's not. There's always two conversants in this conversation, right? So I think, this is a larger conversation, Ari, but I think in many ways, rabbis have lost a bit of that edge to be able to lead a congregation, not just and to push ideas in a community, as opposed to just servicing the needs of that community. I think if you were to ask me, like, what is one of Rabbi Schulweis's absolute greatest gifts, was the dance he did between servicing the needs and challenging the thinking at the same time. And I don't see a ton of that in the rabbinate as much. And it was something that I think he was very gifted at.
When he was in Northern California, he was the rabbi. He got into some trouble / got national attention because he started teaching what Judaism really says about major issues, which doesn't align necessarily with the congregants or the politics of the time. And to say, some of you are the bad guys in the story. Some of you are the pharaohs in the story. Is that something that we can do, or are we so worried that our synagogue is going to collapse, our federation is going to collapse, our camp, our school, whatever, because we'll teach Torah, but we don't want to do anything that's too touchy because we're going to lose people?
Federation's different, and I can speak to that a little bit, where we're a little freer and a little less free, but just in a different way. And I think that, to be very frank with you, the election cycles of 2016, COVID cycle, and then 2020, and in many ways this election cycle has all made that work just much harder, each step along the way. That when a rabbi should have freedom of the pulpit, that goes all the way back to Rabbi Stephen Wise in the Free Synagogue, was literally his fight with Central Synagogue, which enabled him to create what's called the Free Synagogue, was around freedom of the pulpit, that a rabbi should be able to speak his or her mind as they best see it, given their expertise and learning of Jewish tradition and their ability to guide and build a community. But when we get to the 2016 election cycle and very divisive presidential election around Donald Trump and the COVID lockdowns and whether or not they were important for people's liberty and autonomy versus collective public health. And again, it just becomes more acerbic through the 2020 election cycle and what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. And then again, in this newer cycle that in many ways, congregants have, and Jews in general have, and maybe it's probably not just Jews, have really asked their leaders to be reflections of them as opposed to being people that inspire them to thinking beyond their own.
People are digging in a little bit deeper. And as one of the pastors in our community said to me, we've made God in our image instead of believing that we are made in God's image.
Yeah, I think Yehuda Amichai had a very nice poem about that people want prophets of the past, but not prophets of the future. And he meant that as a double entendre, that literally those who prophesied in the past and those who prophesied about the past. That is to say, things which are already done and already settled, but not those who want to predict the future in an uncomfortable way.
I mean, and that's how it was 2,600 years ago, too. I mean, Jeremiah was not listened to, and Isaiah was not listened to, and Ezekiel
Jeremiah
was
literally called the sisterhood of nobles the cows of Bashan. I don't think you sisterhood and say. I mean, that guy had chutzpah.
Yeah, maybe they were putting relish in the tuna fish, and it really caused a big stir back then.
Yeah, but like to call a bunch of well-heeled women the cows of Bashan really doesn't feel like I mean, that if we think that's
Sure.
today, imagine what that felt like.
Right. But none of them were listened to. I mean, like, one of the jokes that what you, Schulweis, Feinstein, it's just nice that like you all kind of meld together. But one of you said the only prophet who was listened to was Jonah, the one who preached to non-Jews. And so it's always been hard to listen to people who are holding up a mirror to society and saying, this is what ought to be. And that's one of the teachings from VBS has been that the 4-letter name of God is some sort of perfect present, right? Haya, Hey, Yud, Hey is past, and Ihye, Yud, Hey is future, and there is no word for is, are, am in Hebrew, and the closest we have is the 4-letter name of God, and this is what ought to be. This is the world we ought to live in, is a godly, holy, sacred world where we treat each other as equals.
Yeah, but I do want to just say, though, also, like, because like I don't want to go all the way down this path and say that both try to frame Rabbi Schulweis as someone who only pushed the thinking and only pushed in a political agenda with the congregation, because that wasn't true. He never endorsed a candidate. He never told people to vote as a Republican or a Democrat. He never tried to play into those things. He just tried to show where, I think he gave a sermon when this was back in the 90s when Gingrich took over the House of Representatives, and he was talking about bringing God into the voting booth, that you should bring God into the voting booth, but it shouldn't dictate. God's not Republican or Democrat. God's just so much bigger than that. And so I think that he probably had specific policy ideas, but the truth is that he wanted you to vote based on your values, all of your values, not a single value, not a single issue, but all of them, and really deal with the struggle around that, and that the complacency itself is the problem, and it's not. So I just want to say that he never got too far ahead of the congregation or too far outside the congregation, but he was always on the edge, but he would never try to bring politics in that kind of way into the synagogue. And it was a different time, but that I just want to just be clear about that.
Yeah. There's a sermon of his, as I was preparing for High Holidays last year, you look for all sorts of sources, and I was on Schulweis Institute website, and I found this one sermon, and he says something like, I want you to vote. I don't care who you vote for. Then he pauses, he goes, I mean, I care who you vote for. But and then there's a big laugh, because I'm sure people are projecting or imagining who he would endorse, whatever candidate that was, whatever cycle that was. And I thought, like, could I even say that this year? And if I could say, I know who I want you to vote for, would people go, Rabbi, you're pushing something up there?
Yeah.
How do we walk that line? It's something that I think about a lot. I mean, you see behind me, I've got the picture of him. I've got a bunch of his books, along with, Feinstein and Dorff and other local rabbis, of people who I know.
Lovely.
Are there any of his teachings or sermons, personal lessons that the two of you just schmoozed about that stick out?
Like when I was again, those first several years before he got really sick, and his office was across the hall from mine. So my first office at Valley Beth Shalom was a glorified broom closet, but his office was across the hall from mine. So he would come in his 3-piece suit often, unless it was the summer, and then it would just be blazer and slacks and a tie. And he would open the door, and then you just hear him say, "No, I have a question for you." And of course, I'd come in, sit at his desk, and he would ask me a question, and I would have to cancel the rest of my day, because that would be
that'd be the question.
What a wonderful day it was, right? It was really think big thoughts. So, and you asked me, like, what was his some of his teaching? The idea that, and Eddie, Rabbi Feinstein, takes this to heart too, the idea that Jews create Judaism as much as we've inherited Judaism, and that while God is our God, God is not specifically Jewish, that Judaism is a response to the ineffable, not the ineffable itself, and that believing, and there's a big question and debate whether Harold actually believed in God or not. I mean,
sure.
It's all over his writings, it's this debate, because that was secondary to the idea of believing in goodness and conscience itself. So it was, whether that inured in a being was less important to him than how it showed up in our behavior. The idea that systems are built to support people and not to oppress people means that when we construct our Jewish lives, we should do it to try to maximize prosperity and what I would call flourishing, which is not just monetary prosperity, but just the best version of our Jewish life. That the law should follow that, not the other way around. But that was something I've always been...
It is strange that most conservative Jews, most Jews in the world didn't grow up with Rabbi Schulweis. It's strange to me because I grew up with him as the rabbi, and so his theology, whether it was taught by him or Ed Feinstein or Stuart Vogel or Fred Margulies or anybody else at the shul, Neely and Neil and everybody else, was so part of how I believed in Judaism. So my Judaism right now is so informed by his theology. And it wasn't until I was in rabbinical school and Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson, Brad said, I often asked Harold if he believed in God, and he would just smile.
Right.
I go, I never even thought about that as a question, because he taught me that God is in how we do things and how we help people and how we show up for people. That is godly. And I guess the response could be like, all right, well, if that's godly, is there?
It doesn't matter. That's the point. Is maybe I'm conflating some of my own teachers, Neil Gilman's work on sort of his Sacred Fragments work on sort of putting things together. But the truth is this, is that, and I think it's really important for today, more than anything else, is that don't look for God in the catastrophe. Don't look for God in the disaster. Don't look for God in the striving against each other. Look for God in the aftermath when people help each other. And it's what he would call the two names of God. That God is both natural and supernatural. And the natural part is the limiting factor of the universe, that everything is mortal and breaks. There's not a thing in the universe that doesn't break over time. That's the state of entropy. That's just how it is. And the immortal part, which is the other part of God's name, is the part of the response to that, which is the creative, generative part of ourselves, the part that tries to deny the breakdown of the universe, that tries to deny that through love and justice and affirmation. And
or giving it meaning.
Yeah. But meaning is one of the vehicles for that, right? Meaning, I don't think Harold would have said meaning is good enough. I think meaning is the means to that, because then it gets entirely tautological. This is where Gilman and Schulweis kind of got into it with each other.
When did you start calling him Harold? Like, the joke was that even his wife, Malka, who everybody loved, she was amazing, but even she would call him Rabbi. And I remember being in like the first clergy meeting at Valley Beth Shalom that I went to, and they're like, oh, I talked to Harold. And I was like, you call him Harold? Like, I had never heard anybody call him by his first name.
So I had lunch at their house within the first year. Sarah, my wife, and I went over there and had lunch with Malka and the rabbi, and we talked for a long time. And he invited me to call him by his Christian name. That's how he... hard to do it when he was alive. But to be very frank with you, Ari, I didn't really start referring to him as Harold in the third person until after he died, because out of respect for him, but also, I guess, calling him by his first name now makes me feel closer to him. And I miss him terribly. I think this moment misses him terribly. And so I want to feel close to him.
What do you think he'd say about this moment?
I think he would struggle mightily. I think he would have anger around how we treat each other. I think he'd have anger about how the world treats Jews and Israel in this moment. I think that he would not ever make it easy for us, which was his entire goal, to shift us out of our complacency. So to say that the Jewish life is only about supporting Israel or being Zionist is too small thinking. And to say it's only about tikkun olam and making the universalistic overtures is just too small. Thank God is too big for that. And so I think he would play that role of interlocutor. And anytime that someone felt complacent, and he would feel complacent, he would probably give him a punch in the nose and say, that's not right. That's what I think it would happen.
What was your path to the rabbinate?
Back to the beginning. Look, I grew up in Texas.
Yeah.
I had conservative Jewish parents. We grew up in a not great environment. It was very lower middle class, small, tiny. At first we were in Dallas, which was lovely and part of a Jewish community that we couldn't afford to be a part of And that's actually where I met Rabbi Feinstein for the first time. And by third grade, we couldn't afford day school anymore. So they pulled us out and we ended up in Plano. And we had a kosher home, but we had 3 sets of dishes. We had meat dishes and dairy dishes and Chinese food dishes. And we had to used to order a meat from Chicago. And I had to go twice a year down to Dallas to pick up the frozen meat and put it in our garage freezer. That's how I grew up. And I grew up in a very not great place. It was a cornerstone of Southern Baptist Christianity. That it was old school anti-Semitism, like you killed Jesus kind of stuff. We had serious anti-Semitism in our schools, although it was also at the same time, and this is what people don't ever understand, is that things can be great and terrible at the same time. So on a Tuesday, it might be great, and on a Wednesday, it could be terrible, and on a Thursday, it could be great. And if you're not in this moment realizing that you can be elated and infuriated at the same time, then you're not really paying attention. So that's what it looked like. That's what it looked like almost everywhere. And so we ended up having some very significant anti-Semitism when I was a sophomore in high school, and I was was very depressed about it. And my parents saw that, and I found a program called the Alexander Muss High School in Israel program under the auspices of United Synagogue Youth, USY. And I applied and I went, and it literally pulled me out of school for a semester of sophomore year. And so I went and lived in Israel, and there I had a quintessential Christian moment. I met God there. And for friends of mine who are either trans or gay or have different type of queer identities, that you walk through the world never feeling right until you do. And as a Jew growing up in Plano, it's kind of the same experience when I was a kid. Very different now, and I don't want anyone to have any preconceived notions of what Plano's like now. But when I was a kid, you walk around and you just felt like you were on the outside of every conversation. You were not part of the rhythm. You were the outsider. And when I moved to Israel for that very short period of my life, it was the first time where my outsides felt like my insides. It's sort of the same feeling that I think that those who have these different type of identities probably feel when they come to that realization and meet other people who have that. So that's it. You cannot understand. Most people cannot understand how powerful the shift that is for the first time in your life, feeling like you're not other and that you're part of something and a part of a people that is so much broader and greater than anything you can imagine, and you feel normal. That drive towards normality is, you cannot understand how powerful that is and what people will do to try to achieve that. And so in that experience, and it's the state of Israel that enabled that for Jews. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a strong Zionist. And why, and through that process, I was 15. I said, this is it. And I dedicated my life to Torah and the Jewish people ever since, and then now it's 30 years later, I'm still doing it.
That's amazing, and a good advertisement. This episode's brought to you by Alexander Muss High School. Right, and now you're in this incredible position. You took this job like right before October 7th. It's not the job you thought you were stepping into, which so often happens, right? It's similar to my job here. I started right before COVID. Life happens. What's informing you to fight anti-Semitism? Like, how are you getting through that? Because you're having meetings on all levels with national, international, local schools, kids. I mean, is there anything that's helping you persevere through these moments?
I started the job in 2021.
Okay.
Or 22, actually. I showed up to the building and everyone was still in lockdown from like the last wave of COVID, and literally the only one in the 150,000 square foot building besides me and like 2 other people. And I was like, okay, well, this is, I guess job 1 is to figure out how to get this building back up and operating again, because we got to get people together. And then 6 months later, Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And so it's been just one thing after another, whether it was this, Ukraine, the first little Gaza flare up. I don't think if remember that. Then the second Gaza war, there was the Franklin fire in Malibu. And then this war has persisted, and now we had the wildfires and the Palisades and Altadena. So it's just been one thing after another. And I didn't even talk about Kanye and anti-Semitism and all the other crazy things. It's been, but so here's what I learned. Okay, so I think you know this. I was at one point a reserve chaplain in the U.S. Navy, and I worked after Hurricane Katrina for 2 years in Biloxi, Mississippi, and Gulfport, Mississippi. And when I learned an acronym back then that really has kept me, and there's some spiritual stuff here too, but I want to just understand the psychology for a minute. And that acronym is something we should all understand, and that is VUCA, V-U-C-A, VUCA. It's what those who act in crazy environments refer to the environment as. So VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So volatility means just the speed at which things are changing, up, down, and the volume of change. Uncertainty, drastic, uncertain outcomes, right? We don't know where this is going. Complexity, multiple systems, all is being changed, shaped, and destroyed and rebuilt simultaneously. And ambiguity is we don't even know where it's coming from necessarily all the time because it's happening so quickly, and we don't even know how to measure it. So that's VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And you can get upset about that. You can be sad about that. You can be sad about the world. You can be sad about fires in Ukraine and Gaza and violent anti-Semitism and the hostages and the political divide and the income inequality and the correction territory the market is in and maybe going into recession by the next quarter. You can get into all of those things and get into your feelings about all of those things. But the question is, how are you going to act in all of those things? And when you study this stuff and you internalize it, you realize a few things are really important. You need to be both focused and nimble. And you need to understand your action, your zone of what's called zone of capacity, which is like what you're actually able to do and what you're not able to do. And you need to understand your values and who your people are. If you understand those things, who are your people, what are your values, you understand what your capability of action is and what your capability of action is not. You just understand those things, really, if it boils down to that, you can act positively in this environment. And so who are your people? I'll just go through them really quickly. Things that make me, how I persevere, how all of us, I think, should persevere. Who are our people? Our people are each other. There's a covenant between us that is inexplicable. There are no other people in the world. As hard as it is to be a Jew, that's something we talk about a lot, but there are no other people in the world who will stop everything in a moment's notice, raise billions of dollars, fly halfway across the world, and rescue other Jews from oppressed environments, volatile environments, difficult environments, even though we've never met them before. There is a covenant between us that extends beyond race, ethnicity, socioeconomic, and geography and history. It expands, it's transcendent. So once you understand who your people are and you affirm that, you know who you're going to act with. What are our values? I think that it's really important to be very clear about our values, even if those values contradict each other. Security and freedom, for example, are just in direct contradiction all the time. But the values of what it means, of family, of our history, of what's right in the world, democracy, let's say, values that help perpetuate our people, right? Those are things that I think are really important. And then there's capacity for action. There are things we can't do. That's just a fact. None of us run organizations, you and I especially, don't even run organizations that are big enough to take on some of these issues. So how do we focus our actions on things which are productive? And for someone maybe listening to this, that might just mean taking care of your family. That might mean taking care of your family and your extended family, your friends, what Rabbi Schulweis would call your chavara, your sort of like immediate group. It might mean your synagogue. And maybe if you have a ability to take care of your company and your employees, or the company you work for and fellow employees, or maybe you have the capacity to do a little bit more. It all depends on what your capacity is. And then the things that are beyond your capacity, you shouldn't allow the feelings about those things linger. It's okay to be shocked, but you shouldn't allow that shock to paralyze you. So, and there are lots of methodologies. So you're asking me, like, what is what maintains me is just this mentality of the things I can control, I will control. The things I cannot control, I cannot control. And I will walk through this world with my people, my history, and my values. And that's what I'm going to focus on. Sorry, you got a whole sermon on that one, but
it is. And I was like taking notes going, this is really powerful, and you are welcome to write my sermons for me anytime. So
I'm smiling. You do just fine.
I can't imagine what you are going through, but it's also all of us. Anybody, any household, city, synagogue, library, school district is trying to fight or understand so many different people who are all very certain in their echo chambers that they are correct, and to hold all of them and to remind them that they are human and they are holy, even if we firmly disagree with them. Any lessons on leadership from Schulweis? I don't know if he was involved as much in leadership when in your time there.
By the time that I came, Jewish World Watch was already launched, which was his last great initiative. So I didn't see him on board meetings of the NAACP or other things. I only studied those things. What I know from my experience of him and his writings, again, is that leaders need to be sure of themselves, but also willing to be flexible, to listen to the best opinions of the best people and change their minds. And that leaders in a democracy are truly servants of the people they work with. Not to serve their interests, but to marry their interests with their own and be able to deliver for the community what's most important. And so I take that to heart, and the role models we have for that from our tradition really is Moshe Rabbeinu, and thinking about how Moses was both a servant of the people and a leader of the people.
Rabbi Noah Farkas, you had an amazing career at Valley Beth Shalom, and then you got called to lead the Federation. What made you decide to leave the suburban synagogue life and go work at LA Federation? And what do they do? And what's your role day to day?
Leaving the synagogue was hard because I very much enjoyed the multi-year relationship of watching families grow, and to walk into a place where I knew everyone. And the people I didn't know were additive. It was like a new thing. And then I could have stayed there for the rest of my career, the rest of my life. And I traded away that security for this other opportunity. And the reason why I did that primarily was because I wanted the challenge, and I felt like they were the greatest opportunity to make positive change. So the Federation has existed in one form or another across all Jewish communities for thousands of years. In our tradition, as you know as a rabbi, you arrive to a town, and one of the first things you have to do, not the only thing, but one of the first things you have to do is establish a community fund to take care of the poor. That's what a federation is in its heart. We collect donations, philanthropy, thousands and thousands. That's what the word to federate means, is to federate the system together. And we form a collective pool of money that makes for a safer, more joyous, more well-connected Jewish community here in LA, across the country, across the world, and especially in Israel. And that's what the Federation does. And the allocations process of all that money, it's complicated and it can be bureaucratic, but the truth is everyone who is an allocator, is both professional and lay leaders, see this as the community's money, the community's responsibility. They really take that fiduciary claim very, very seriously. And when allocation decisions are made, it's made by dozens and dozens of people. It's not like all the money's given to me and then I'm like King Achashverosh, where I just kind of like dole it out. It really is a democratic process. We have 72 committees at the Federation.
Wow. So
just to give you a sense of the thickness of the thing, right? What we do is we have three major areas we focus on. We focus on our historic commitment, which has been for over 114 years of caring for Jews in need, orphans and widows and Holocaust survivors and refugees and immigrants. And we put millions and millions of dollars to work with our partners, through our partners, investing in our partners to help those in need. Get them out of harm's way, get them food assistance, rental assistance, cash assistance, mental health assistance, etc. We do that here, and we do that in Israel. And during the Ukraine war, we did that increasingly in Eastern Europe. The second major area is positive Jewish identity formation. And That's really important to us. So we help work with schools. There are 10,000 Jewish students in Jewish private schools, so we're trying to support them the best we can. There's about 7,500 Jews in Jewish supplementary schools. We try to support them the best we can. And we have about 5,000 campers in Jewish camps, and we try to support them the best we can. And that doesn't include our young adult program called New Roots, which engages hundreds and hundreds of post-college, pre-family formation young adults with partners across the country to try to get them interested in Jewish life and begin to craft and sculpt their Jewish lives. And our new program, which is called New Bloom, which is a combination of all of our suite of programs that deal with early childhood families. And it's a definite focus of mine is growing the early childhood platform of the Federation. So that's we call it ensuring the Jewish future, and we believe that the future of Judaism is only secured through proactive initiatives that teach every generation the values that we hold and the joy of what it means to be Jewish. And then the last major area that we work on is called community engagement, and that is about activating our Jewish values in the broader community. So that's where when we talk about fighting anti-Semitism, the major parts of where we fight it are found in community engagement, multi-ethnic, multiracial coalition building, government affairs, legislative work, working across differences, trying to support the 50,000 Jewish students in LAUSD, trying to support people in the workplace who are Jewish, etc., and then working with our synagogues. So those are the three major areas that we work, if you called those verticals. And then our horizontals really are Israel. It shows up in each one of those. So it's not a separate department. Israel shows up in our human service, social services, behavioral health work. Israel shows up in our positive Jewish identity formation work. We fund programs in Israel that do that work. And Israel definitely shows up in our community engagement work of building social cohesion across the Bedouin, the Druze, the Israeli Arab, and Israeli Jewish communities. And also I'm doing workforce development for the Haredi community so that they become part of a productive society in Israel. So those are all things that we work on across the board. And then the last horizontal, I would say, would be leadership. And we run 6 leadership development programs. We're about to launch our 7th this year because we're trying to improve the sector, the Jewish nonprofit sector. And then we have a security off to the side, which isn't in a particular department, but that is a service we give to the Jewish community, is monitoring security and intelligence and safety for the whole Jewish community. So all of that is to say, I know it's a lot, but all of that is to say that we, in this very volatile environment, we focus on our people and we focus on your values, our values together, and we put those values in action through all these different ways to make Jewish life better as best we can for everyone.
And how your day-to-day is checking in with each of the, you have an amazing staff and incredible volunteers, and you really get the cream of the crop of people who want to be involved in Los Angeles jewelry or international jewelry from Los Angeles. What's something in the day-to-day that would be surprising?
Every day is different. It should be clear, and this could go into a business podcast, but the role of the CEO, which is my role, is not to operate the business. I don't work in the business. I work on the business. You set a vision, you come up with where you think you can go, you hire the best people, you develop your teams, and then you push that vision outward. So most of my time internally is working with our various teams to improve their work, to give them ideas, to give them feedback, to give them mentorship. And then across federations across the country, 146 federations, is to learn and to teach across. And then beyond that is to interact with government officials, interact with large foundations, interact with donors, to push that vision outward, to grow the brand of Jewish life, and by extension, grow the brand of Federation. And it's been successful. We've almost doubled our size in 3 years. And that does not include the Israel funding. That's just better work that we've done because we demonstrate value. And so my role, and people ask, someone asked me, and you're probably going to ask me, and we can close out on this Federation piece by asking me, so you used to be a rabbi. And I say my rabbinate shows up every single day in the work that I do.
Yeah.
Because there's no such thing as a secular Jew. It's a Jew. Maybe you don't believe in God, which is fine. Or you don't go to synagogue, which is fine. Or you don't keep kosher, which is fine. Or you don't marry someone who's Jewish, it's fine. But Judaism is not a secular endeavor. It is a religious, multi-ethnic civilization endeavor. And I guess this goes back to Rabbi Schulweis, right? Because Rabbi Schulweis was the number one student of Mordechai Kaplan, who coined the term Judaism as a civilization. And so that I see myself in that mode of furthering the civilization that is the Jewish people.
And you, of course, you sell it well. You explain what you're doing with such passion, which is amazing that you're in a place that you can do that.
And that I learned from Harold.
Is there a funny, a personal story about Rabbi Schulweis? Something that maybe the rest of the community, the people who sit in the pews, the people who only read his books, or people who've never heard of him, wouldn't think about with him?
He was much funnier than people give him credit for.
I was going to say the same thing.
And didn't always show. And his jokes from the pulpit weren't always funny because they were, basically rabbi jokes and dad jokes are the same type of jokes. So, but sitting on the bima with him, his humor was very biting in only way and incisive and only that someone with his level of intelligence could muster. And also very self-effacing. He knew when he would be a little too philosophical and he'd make fun of himself on the bima. So I'm trying to remember a particular joke or story, and I can't at this moment, but I know his humor was never silliness, but it was always beautifully ironic.
When we think of philosophers, we rarely think of their sense of humor, and he was, among so many other things, a philosopher. And yet, I remember so many times laughing at things that he said. And you're right, not silly. And I resort to silly often because I work with a lot of preschoolers, and it's just so easy to get on the floor with them, which isn't something that he necessarily would have done. But he was very funny. So now we'll go to the final question. Is there a piece of text that you've been thinking about for the last 20 years that you just came across this morning that irks you, excites you?
The number one text, my favorite piece of Talmud, comes from Baba Metzia, 56b. The question was on the table, because this is how they, in Jewish life, they never really just teach things straight out. They always teach through story and parable and discussion. So the question was asked, what would happen if Torah was forgotten by the Jewish people? Like, draw a complete blank, that the process, the flow, from one generation to the next of Torah learning was just completely gone. Almost like you showed up out of nowhere, right? And there was this really interesting conversation between Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Chia Bar Abba about what they would do. And Rabbi Hanina would say, I would lecture and give my argumentative powers to bring Torah back into the world again. And I kept thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe in that case, he would write articles and do podcasts. And, he would, by force of branding and presence, he would teach Torah in the world again. And then he was compared to Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, who said, nope, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plant flax, and then I'm going to grow flax, and then I'm going to harvest the flax and make nets, and then I'm going to use the nets to trap deer. Then I'm going to slaughter the deer and tan the hides and give the meat to orphans. And then I'm going to write on each deer hide one of the books of the Torah and one of the books of the Mishnah. So 5 books of Torah, 6 books of Mishnah. And then I'm going to teach one book to one Jew and make them the expert on that one book. And I'm going to go from town to town doing this and tell them, until I return, you have to teach each other. And of course, the chop was this: he would never return to that town. He would just go to the next town, do it over again. So Rabbi Chia Bar Abba is my favorite rabbi of the Talmud, because what he did is he said, look, it's not about me. And it's about walking the walk first, living the life, and the books come from the life, not the other way around. And each person has the responsibility, the privilege to own one piece of this and bring their expertise to the table to teach each other. And that's how he would bring Torah back in the world again. And I sit with that every day. My job, the job of the Federation, the job of my rabbinate, it's all the same. It's not about me. It's not about the Federation, how big we are. It's not about our budgets. It's about what we enable the community to do and enable the community to live. I think rabbis should be entirely necessary and entirely unnecessary for thriving Jewish life, and that our goal is to have a congregation that's so well knowledgeable that they can teach each other. That's how you keep Torah in the world. So that's my model.
You're doing amazing work. Federation has grown and has touched all of our lives in some incredible ways. Just like for the two of us, we got to sit at the feet of Rabbi Schulweis and learn from him. I can't imagine how us and so many other rabbis and community leaders learned from him what it means to be a Jew in the world today, what it means to have the internal fight every day of all the different angles that we have to be thinking about. So thank you for your time. It's so nice to see your face. Can't wait to see your family for good things.
It's great to be together, Ari, and appreciate you taking on this project. And it feels good coming home in many ways and chatting with you about it.
Thank you for listening to the Moral Courage podcast. We are produced by the Harold M. Schulweis Institute at Valley Beth Shalom, which supports these podcasts in addition to educational programs within Valley Beth Shalom, the Schulweis Library, changing exhibitions at the Liner Chapel at VBS, Jewish World Watch, and the Jewish Community Children's Choir. The Moral Courage podcast is hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach. Our consulting producer is Esther Kostanowitz. Our technical producer is Eric Weiser. We are grateful for the support of the Institute and Haley Lazitsky-Weiser at SadClown Productions. To learn more about Rabbi Schulweis or to make a donation to help support these podcasts, visit the Institute website at hmsi.info.